Hello, I'm Esther Githo. It's Friday, May 6th. This is Africa 54.
Ethiopia is suffering through its worst drought in 4 decades, and malnourished children are filling up hospital pediatric wards. Africa's Center for Disease Control urges nations on the continent to buy COVID vaccines from South Africa's Aspen Pharmacare to boost vaccine manufacturing in Africa. And in our entertainment report, we'll feature a performance by jazz women in Africa. Heather Maxwell will have that showcase.
We begin in the Horn of Africa, where malnourished children are filling the pediatric ward at a hospital in Ethiopia's Somali region as the country suffers its worst drought in 40 years. Clara Frank has more.
At a pediatric ward in Gode, mothers cradle their malnourished children. The hospital in Ethiopia's Somali region has seen an increasing influx of starving kids, victims of the worst drought to hit the country in 40 years. Pediatrician Mohammed Amin said numbers started to spike around 5 months ago.
There is an increase in number, and there is, due to the increase in number and due to the droughts which are available in our area, are some of the causes we are seeing.
Amin says they've treated 140 malnourished children and that 4 have died. The UN's aid chief, Martin Griffiths, recently warned that close to 2 million children are at risk of starving to death in the Horn of Africa region. Many families, like Nemo Mohammed's, have left their home to seek aid. She's staying in a camp and says the adults go without food so the children can eat once a day.
I have 9 children. I had a home and property just like everyone. I am 9 months pregnant, and if I gave birth tonight, this is where I will be sleeping. Things are tough here. This is where we live, 11 people, and we're in this situation because of the drought.
More than 10,000 people are getting aid in the Somali region. 7.2 million across Ethiopia are food insecure, an increase of 2 million over the last 2 months, says World Food Programme spokesperson Claire Neville.
We know that over a quarter of children are suffering malnourishment, and over a third of pregnant and breastfeeding women are severely malnourished because of this drought. So it's essential that we get nutritionally fortified foods to them right now.
The WFP says the Horn of Africa is facing its driest conditions in more than 4 decades. That's after 3 consecutive rainy seasons failed. The organization says 15 million people need food aid across the region, a figure that could rise to 20 million by the end of the year. Clara Frank, VOA News.
Somali lawmakers are expected to pick the country's new president on May 15th in the final step of an election process that has suffered delays due to a rift within the outgoing administration. The selection of a president is a key step in establishing a new government, which must be in place by May 17th if Somalia is to continue receiving budget support from the International Monetary Fund, on which it relies to pay essential bills. The election process was destabilized by Al-Shabaab attacks as well as disagreements between President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed and Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble.
So this election date set for May 15 this month is very important for Somalia's politics and election, because the country has delayed elections for a year, and about 20 candidates, including the incumbent President Farmajo, are running for the position. But the date is important because the Somali's funding program by the IMF and World Bank is expiring on 17th of this month. So the supporters of this decision say it should come before that date. And while the critics say it's too hasty and quick so that the candidates will not get time to campaign and prepare for themselves. So it's very important, and this day is also very important because it is the 79th anniversary of the Somali Youth League.
That was VOA Somali reporter Mohammed Olad. Under Somalia's indirect electoral process, clan elders select the 275 members of the lower house, who in turn choose the president. More than a dozen candidates are expected to compete. Africa's top public health body is urging all those purchasing COVID-19 vaccines for the continent to place orders with South Africa's Aspen Pharmacare, saying the market is key to developing vaccine manufacturing on the continent. Olivia Chan has the details.
Africa's top public health body urged all those purchasing COVID-19 vaccines for the continent to place orders with South Africa's Aspen Pharmacare. The Africa Centre for Disease Control and Prevention said it was doing everything it could behind the scenes to prevent a situation where Aspen closes its facility due to a lack of orders. Aspen CEO Stephen Sard warned that the company will switch about half of its COVID-19 vaccine production capacity onto other products if demand doesn't pick up within 6 weeks. The pharmaceutical company negotiated a licensing deal in November to package and sell Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine and distribute it across Africa. There were also expectations of high demand for the firm's own brand version of the shot. This was hailed as a game-changing moment for an under-vaccinated continent frustrated by sluggish Western handouts. But Aspen's company executive said on Saturday that it had not received a single order for its Aspen Novavax vaccine. It currently has the capacity to produce around 1 million vaccine doses per day. Roughly half of that is being used to fulfill a supply agreement with Johnson & Johnson. Sard added the remaining capacity, which had been expected to produce Aspen Novavax shots destined for the African market, is currently sitting idle. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa told state broadcaster SABC on Wednesday he had reached out to the governments of Zambia, Uganda, Malawi and Kenya in an attempt to drum up orders for Aspen.
That was Olivia Chan of Reuters reporting. African countries are particularly affected by soaring food and fuel prices caused by the war in Ukraine. This jeopardizes the continent's recovery from the devastating socio-economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, according to the United Nations Assistant Secretary General Ahuna Eziakonwa.
Ukraine and Russia seem very far away from the continent, but the impact right now is reverberating on the continent in many different ways. And that also goes to indicate that we now live in a small village. The war in Ukraine, we see another dimension of dependence rearing its head, and that is the dependence on food imports. In some countries, up to 80% of importation of wheat from Russia and Ukraine. With the disruptions that now happen, you see, again, an urgent situation materializing, because where do these countries turn?
That was Ahuna Eziakonwa, the United Nations Assistant Secretary General. Ugandan media and NGOs are denouncing the increase in arrested journalists. Ugandan journalists often face rough treatment at the hands of security forces, which soared during the 2021 election. That poll was marred by the worst violence in years. Paul Ndiho has more.
Uganda prides itself as a nation that has liberalized the media. It has more than 200 radio stations and over 30 independent television stations. Private and government-owned newspapers of the country. But very often, Ugandan journalists face rough treatment at the hands of security forces, which soared during the 2021 election, marred by the worst bloodshed in years.
Judging by the engagement on radios, the number of radio stations, TV stations, judging by the content, where there's serious criticism, challenging of government. However, that does not mean that there are no isolated cases.
The East African country has seen a series of crackdowns on those opposed to President Yoweri Museveni's rule, particularly around last year's election, with journalists attacked, lawyers jailed, vote monitors are persecuted, and opposition leaders violently muzzled.
63 journalists were assaulted in the line of duty. And unprecedentedly, we also had journalists arrested to a tune of 26 journalists arrested. It doesn't happen that way in Uganda, because journalists are normally beaten but not arrested.
The rights situation in Uganda has also been highlighted by the case of an award-winning author and outspoken government critic, Akwenza Rukira-Basaija, who was charged with insulting President Yoweri Museveni. The author was awarded the 2021 Pen Painter Prize for an International Writer of Courage, which is presented annually to a writer who has been persecuted for speaking about their beliefs. Last February, the novelist fled to Germany to seek medical treatment out of fear for his life after being tortured, according to his Ugandan lawyer. Ugandan activist Norman Tumuhimbise was then arrested on March 10th, alongside Farida Bakobire, who works with him at online media platform Digital Talk Television, on charges of cyber-stalking the country's president. Both were released on bail on March 21st.
Government wants to gag the freedom of media, the media freedom, expression, and freedom of speech. That is why our gadgets, which have nothing to do with the books, are still in their custody. That is why the media presenters, not authors of these books, were arrested and beaten.
In principle, the Constitution guarantees freedom of the press. Still, in practice, the media are hindered by laws including those on fraudulent digital activity, anti-terrorism, and public order. In 2021, the Constitutional Court rejected appeals by journalist associations against the Korean legal provisions against the media. As a result, journalists face many obstacles and pressure for self-censorship when they seek information of public interest. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Lawrence Kiwanuka Nsereko, a professor, journalist, and activist, left Uganda after being persecuted because of his work. He spoke to VOA about his experience.
For some reason, I ended up being very much interested in issues of human rights as a reporter. That led me to report on things like corruption. We had had a civil war where the current government, led by Museveni, were the rebels. So they overthrew the sitting government. And the international community gave in a lot of money to rehabilitate the war-ravaged areas. But many of the items, hose, wheelbarrows, which were given, were ending up on the private market. I pursued the story, I published it. The wife of the president happened to be part of the people, the local NGOs that were distributing these items. And her name showed up, and I named her in the newspaper. And for the first time, I was summoned to the State House and questioned and warned. And the president in his wife told me to leave his wife and the children alone. Later on, I wrote a story about someone who was challenging the government. And again, I was called to the president's office. I was offered money to reveal where the person I had interviewed was hiding. And I said, no, it's against the principles of journalism for me to do that. I can't reveal my source. The president wasn't very happy, but he let me go. So on my way home, I was picked up and I was detained, beaten up. When somebody offers you money to keep quiet, or to leave the profession, to be able to say, I'm not taking your money, I am staying true to the principles of journalism. One of the biggest problems in the media in Uganda is self-censorship. When the president told me to leave his family and his wife alone, I don't think I ever wrote an article mentioning Museveni's wife again until I left Uganda. When you look on the paper and you see how many radio stations are in Uganda, you would say, wow, there is a lot of media freedom in Uganda. But then peel the page off and ask yourself, who owns these radio stations? I think we have about 320-something operating radio stations in Uganda, but I think about 311 are owned by either NRM party members or by the government, because Museveni tolerates no criticism whatsoever. He doesn't believe that journalists are just a conveyor belt. What you manufacture is what we deliver to the other end. You do it, we report it. He doesn't understand that. He's called them CIA agents. He's called them parasites. He's called them Western agents, anti-nationalists. And by the end of the day, so many journalists have been charged with treason. If you report a story about people they consider terrorists, then they say you are aiding and abetting terrorism. The government has people who are out there to monitor social media, who has posted what, who has said what. I had started a newspaper here. We had published it slowly, quietly. We are sending the magazines to Uganda. In 2007, actually, I have a copy of one of those. This is the copy of one of the magazines, okay, with a Museveni caricature on the cover. And when we published that particular magazine, we sent it to Uganda, and the entire consignment was confiscated at the airport. And that magazine, particular magazine, we're talking about Museveni's interest in the DRC, in Rwanda, in Tanzania, in Kenya, and the Southern Sudan, and how he was trying to become the overlord. So we figured out that if that's what they are doing, we will figure out how to publish the magazine secretly in the country. Well, they were one step ahead of us. They figured out who the printer was. Museveni had just sent his son to a military school. And we figured out he was preparing him as a successor. And Museveni was on the cover crowning his son as the next president. They invaded the printing press, took all the articles, and the publisher was also in trouble. We basically gave up on it. Be safe. It's always very important to live to see another day. I believe that actual heroes live to tell the stories. Don't die in the field.
That was Lawrence Kiwanuka Sereko, a Ugandan journalist who now lives in exile. We'd like to hear what you think about Africa 54. Africa 54's new Facebook page is facebook.com/VOA Africa. Still to come in our entertainment report, Heather Maxwell will feature jazz women in Africa. We'll be back. Here's a sneak peek into a special VOA documentary about one city in Senegal.
benn guddi rek la fa lay mbir mi xewoon fii ndeysaan fii lañ départ rek ne Sénégal ñu ngay dem bu ndaw yëpp demee bàyyi fii mag kese ah xam nga dëkk ba sooxe na bu ñu sañoon moom suñu doom yi duñu fi jógee
da ngay nekk ci biir gaal gi vague bi di dóor gaal gi di dugal di la ko sàmm ci biir gaal gi nga toog noonu pendant une semaine mu metti trop waaye doo lekk doo naan.
Devoir jeter nos frères à la mer sans leurs parents voir leur corps. C'était vraiment dur.
Be sure to watch the full documentary at voanews.com/documentaries. It's time for our Friday Entertainment Report, and joining us now is Music Time in Africa host Heather Maxwell. Hello, Heather.
Hi, Esther. Hello, everyone. One of the most interesting performances of International Jazz Day last week was a group called Jazz Women in Africa. Here's part of that great performance. right, and that's it for this week's Entertainment Report. Esther, back to you.
You have to tell me, where all these women from Africa are from.
Oh, yes. So 3 of them are from Senegal. 1 is from Mali, the drummer, Equatorial Guinea, Togo, and Ghana.
Wow, they are amazing. That was a wonderful performance there, Heather.
They sure are.
All right. Heather, thanks. Be sure to join Heather Maxwell each Friday for her Africa 54 Entertainment Report. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our new Facebook page, facebook.com/VOA Africa. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.